Hello, ladies and gentlemen. So, throughout much of the 2024 campaign, the state of Georgia wasn't considered a competitive state, even though it had gone Democrat just 2 years before in the midterm elections for Senate, and 4 years before that for President and for Senate. On both runoff elections, Democrats won both Georgia Senate seats, defeating two incumbents. But even with that, it wasn't considered competitive until later in the cycle when Kamala Harris began to seemingly have momentum and began to seemingly become competitive for some of these Sunbelt states. Now, did she really have a chance of winning it at all? Probably not. Even though it was only a 2.2% margin, that's the type of margin that Kamala Harris probably wouldn't be able to overcome. I'd say that she was definitely able to win a state like Wisconsin, flip a few counties, even though she didn't end up flipping any counties. But especially since Georgia, she had most things go right for her in 2024. I really don't think Georgia was within reach. The problem for Kamala Harris was the rural areas were always going to shift Republican off a cliff, especially black belt counties where black voters are shifting GOP at a slight rate, and especially making up a lower percent of the electorate as they move to other states or move to these Atlanta suburbs or just die out or stop turning out. After all, turnout, not raw vote wise, but turnout for the most part in Georgia was lower than 2020 as a percent of registered voters, which probably out of all 50 states was one of only a few where it favored Trump. Now, Georgia, for many people, is considered the next blue state, and I would agree with that. Um, I think that Georgia will probably end up as a relatively blue leaning state in a while. It's not America's next blue state out of the seven swing states. That would be Wisconsin, but it is a good candidate for being a blue state a while down the line, and it will be an eventual Democrat win. But we're dealing in inevitabilities decades down the line, and in decades and centuries, we will all be turned to dust. So the real question is, how does Georgia trend? How does Georgia move before then? Because I've made this case quite a few times. I really haven't seen anyone make this case since the election, but I think there's quite a bit of fight left in the Georgia GOP, and I don't think this state is as gone as people make it out to be. Now, to understand why I think that, you have to understand these Georgia coalitions, and why I believe that the Georgia coalition could potentially help Republicans pick up a Senate seat in 2026 and hold a crucial governor's seat in 2026. Um, why do Democrats win Georgia? You have to ask yourself that question. And I mean, I'm the YouTuber. I'm the one with the New York Times map up. I'm going to tell you. But if you think it's, oh, the college educated whites are all trending overwhelmingly Democrat in these suburban counties, Gwinnett County, well known for being so college white educated, then you're wrong. Uh, Surprisingly, quite a few people think this. Quite a few people I know, even, who really haven't delved into the numbers and are caught in the media storm, think that the reason Georgia has flipped is because of the college educated suburbanites flipping from GQP, Romney, and Trump to Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. That's really not why the state flipped Republican in 2020. The reason is demographic change. These suburbs around Atlanta have been getting more and more Democrat as they've been getting more and more racially diverse. And even racially diverse is stretching it because they're not really, at some point, they're hitting a tipping point where they're becoming less racially diverse because they're becoming overwhelmingly black. Counties like Henry County, counties like Douglas County, counties like Clayton County, Rockdale, even Newton are becoming very, very African American, and because of that, they're shifting very, very Democrat. Now, does that mean that Democrats can win Georgia in presidential years? Yes. I think it will remain a competitive state heading into the next decade or two. I still, obviously, am not going to make a call for 2028, say this state will vote this way and this state will vote that way, for sure. That's what the election predictions for hypothetical 2028s are. And also, we just don't know that as of now. But I do think that the Georgia coalition will help Democrats in the long term. And I stress in the long term because, like I said, the state is not an insta flip come 2028. Now, why do I say that? Well, in Georgia, it's one of actually a few states where college educated whites vote like R plus 30. Now, you see this across a lot of southern states. If you had whites in Mississippi or Louisiana or even North Carolina vote the same way as whites do in a state like New York or Massachusetts, they would be blue states. Like, Mississippi has a massive black population. The reason it's Republican is because the white population votes overwhelmingly Republican. Like 90-10 Republican. That's the only reason Republicans carry Mississippi. You can make a similar argument for South Carolina. Even though South Carolina is a bit more college educated, the idea that like college educated voters are instantaneously going to flip Republican is ludicrous. Like or flip Democrat, it's ludicrous. That's not what happens in these states. Like just because the rate of college attainment is high doesn't mean that Democrats are going to be winning this state in 5 years. That's just not how it works because in the South, college educated voters lean heavily Republican. Now, that's opposed to the North, where if you picked out the average college educated voter in the Northeast or in a place like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, they would probably lean Democrat. And what does that mean? Well, one, for these two elections, it means that college educated voters who are more likely to turn out will lean Republican. Now, you might say, oh, but what about the white working class in Georgia? There really isn't any white working class to the extent that there is in a Michigan or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania or Ohio or Illinois or Minnesota. There really isn't as much white working class in Georgia. For the most part, these rural areas are somewhat exurban, but mostly rural, traditional GOP voters. Now, do they turn out at massive rates in midterms? No. But the problem is, the average black voter is less likely to turn out than the average Georgia college educated voter and the average Georgia rural voter. What does that mean? This coalition is completely unstable. If you see turnout go down 10% more than the statewide average in Atlanta, Democrats are locked out of winning Georgia. You can win Fayette County. Congrats. You lose. You can flip the three bellwethers of Baldwin, Washington, and Jefferson. Congrats. You lose. There's no way to win Georgia if you're suffering that much compared to the rest of the state in Atlanta. And the problem for 2026 is you likely won't get that turnout in Georgia. Now, one, the reason why 2022 Senate even went Democrat was because Herschel Walker was a terrible candidate. You have to understand that first. Walker was a terrible candidate. Warnock was a pretty good candidate, able to turn out the base. And two, the Stacey Abrams machine didn't single handedly give Democrats the state. Perhaps it pushed them over the finish line, but there were a number of other factors that led to Biden's upset win in 2020 and Democrats winning both of those Senate elections, but it was a contributing factor. The problem is that machine has completely degenerated itself over the last 2 or so years. Stacey Abrams is a dead statewide figure. I don't think she'll be nominated for governor. I don't think she'll run because I think she's just completely out of statewide politics. And if she runs, you lose whatever seat she runs for. So, congrats on that. But the machine that turned out black voters for all these elections, for these off year elections, even for the runoffs in 2021 and 2022, it's gone. That machine is dead where it stands. It's completely collapsed in on itself. You don't have a machine to turn out these black voters for these off year elections. And the common misconception that the runoffs will help Democrats in Georgia is founded on nothing. Now, we have to explain these. And if you don't know the story, this isn't going to make sense. So in 2020, you have two Senate elections in Georgia. I don't have it pulled up. We have a regular Senate election where David Perdue is facing failed 2017 congressional candidate John Ossoff. Yes, 2017, it was a special election, like a Trump plus one district that he ended up losing by three. Ossoff underperformed Hillary Clinton. Where could that come in handy for a prediction? But you had that election, which was somewhat competitive. And then you had another election on the Senate ballot where, what's his name? You had the incumbent senator, Johnny Casson, resign early due to health complications. I think he died in 2021. Rest in peace. And because of that, you had a special election where you had what's her name? These people, their names are fading out of my mind. But you had Raphael Warnock run for that. Originally, it wasn't really decided who Democrats would coalesce against. Um, there was a chance that two Republicans would make the runoff because what Georgia does, and you saw this in 2018 in Mississippi, but you have a, I don't think nonpartisan, but you have a special election where all different candidates run on the ballot when you can't schedule a primary. Because there just wasn't enough time. He resigned way too late, so there wasn't enough time to hold a primary. But you had the incumbent senator. Her name is escaping me at this point. Um, Complete idiot. On my part for not remembering that. But you also had her being challenged to the right to some extent by Doug Collins, a representative. He was the representative of the northeastern portion of Georgia, who are now represented by Andrew Clyde. Kelly Loeffler, that was her name. Kelly Loeffler was the incumbent senator, kind of moderate, not great. And what happened is both those Senate races went to runoff. Now, the special election, 100% expected. The winner was going to get like a 35% plurality. It was really just deciding on who got second place between the two Republicans running for Senate. The representative from a Georgia congressional seat or the incumbent appointed Senate Republican. Now, the Senate regular election held concurrently, the one scheduled for 2020 now up in 2026. Mild upset that ended up heading to a runoff. David Perdue got like 49.7. Ossoff got a similar share in 47.9, still down by like 2%. Would have lost without the runoff system, but it still had headed to a runoff because there was a candidate, I think a libertarian on the ballot, who took like 3% of the vote away from both candidates. So technically, no candidate hit 50%. Now, what happened to those runoffs was obviously the election stuff. Um, I defend Trump most of the time. I think he's a good president. I think he's much better than any idiot Democrats put up. I'm obviously a partisan Republican. I really don't think people can argue with that. But what he did was retarded. With all the election stuff, like it's a tough pill to swallow. But the 2020 election was not rigged. Um, was completely untransparent. Was not fair. Also, a lot of the election laws were changed in the states just like months before the general election was held. So the states held it in different ways. From the statewide primary compared to the general election was stupid, but there was not fraud. And what happened was Trump, on the inside, we to some extent know that he wanted both Republicans to lose in Georgia, and he completely sabotaged them. All the election stuff, no one wanting to turn out, McConnell at the same time with the stimulus checks, not letting them go through. It was terrible. Like, Republicans ran some of the worst campaigns for these runoffs that decided Senate control, mind you. Had Republicans won both of these runoffs, they would have a 52 to 48 Senate majority. Now, that's one less than they had in after 2018, but still, it's one more than they had after 2016. It's or 2017 after the Alabama special. It's still a pretty good Senate majority. What that would have meant is that even 2022, it goes the exact same way. Republicans are at 51 Senate seats, and now they're at 55. Now they're only at 53 because of that. Also, you do have to factor in that the Kelly Loeffler seat would be up for re-election in 2022, but I doubt she loses there for reasons I'll explain later. But completely idiotic what Republicans did for those runoffs. You can throw those in the trash. Republicans ran some of the worst campaigns ever for those runoffs. They lost, obviously, but they did much better than they realistically should have in those runoffs. So that's why Georgia has two Democrat senators, in case you don't know, or it had two Democrat senators for 2 years, and then one of them was up for re-election. Raphael Warnock runs against Herschel Walker in 2022. Walker's a horrible, horrible candidate. He gets it within one, but what happens is Republicans do terrible enough in the midterms that when that Senate race heads to a runoff, see how this happens every single fucking cycle, then Republican turnout is severely depressed. Walker ran a terrible campaign. Suddenly, all the pollsters who had him leading in the initial round by like three, suddenly all have him losing by three. And, closer than expected by some people, Senate runoff, it ends up as like Warnock plus 2.6 or something like that. To put that in perspective, all the people like radical politics is so biased towards Republicans. That was the exact Senate margin he predicted. Like he got it down to the decimal. So if you want to say, "Oh, Raphael Warnock outperformed expectations massively," no, he didn't. He outperformed real Americans' expectations. Wow, who could have ever expected that? Like no one expected Walker to get anywhere close there, and still he got it within three, which is impressive because, especially since Chase Oliver, the you might notice him, if we go to the Georgia ballot, he had a few votes, 0.4% lower than his national share in his home state, but he got a few votes, nearly less than Joe Stein. But his voters broke for Warnock in the runoff. It was just a terrible scenario for the GOP. You also didn't have people like Kemp on the ballot. Had that gubernatorial election gone to a runoff, Republicans might have done better for that Senate election. Stacey Abrams would have had no chance of winning that, but like it didn't. And that being the only race on the ballot, even I think in 2020, 2021, you had a statewide corporation commissioner or like I don't know, public service commission is what I'm thinking of. You had a statewide election there on the ballot, which at least turned out some more Republicans. Had you had a gubernatorial election on the ballot, I think Walker would have had a chance, but Warnock probably still would have ended up winning. So, what do we have for these runoffs? We have one where Republicans tried to lose, and the other one where they had suffered a horrific, demoralizing defeat just a month before, and you didn't have anyone else, any other slate of candidates on the statewide ticket when I mean, it wasn't like Stacey Abrams was propping up Raphael Warnock. So that was expected. It's less explainable than 2020, but you can also explain that with like Democrats are really good at turning out black voters to the polls. Now, heading into 2026, you really have no evidence that these Georgia runoffs favor Democrats. And it's in fact the opposite because you see here these college educated voters outside of Atlanta, even in some of these precincts where black voters are a heavy portion of the vote, but there's still some college educated voters there. You see, especially when there's low turnout, Republicans overperform. You saw, I think it was Cobb County. You had two seats on the Cobb County Board of Commissioners, which, by the way, are like as big as a state senate seat in Georgia and bigger than almost anything else that was up for election in a special election over the last 6 months or so. Besides for the Florida congressional specials, and you saw Republicans overperform by like 15% there off of this 2024 margin. Remember, Cobb County moved a whopping 0.6% Democrat in 2024. So you can't say, oh, well, they only outperformed Biden's margin by 3%. No, they outperformed both of those margins by 15%. What does that mean? When black voters don't turn out for these, Republicans overperform because they have the college educated base, they have the high propensity base in Georgia, and black voters, for the most part, do not turn out for these elections. Now, 2026 is going to be different. Midterm year, some big statewide elections on the ballot. We will have our first test in 2025. 2025, I'm going to go on my rant about the Georgia Public Service Commission. This was the coolest system like I can imagine for public service commission elections. So what happens is you had four districts throughout the state, about equal population. So if you wanted to run for a seat on the Georgia Public Service Commission, you'd have to live in that district, but it would be elected statewide. So what happens is you practically have four different statewide elections in all these different years, but it also allows for local representation. So what you do is you have all those statewide elections, but you also have it so like the Republicans can't win all four seats, but all four of their candidates are from Cherokee County. Or Democrats can't win all four seats, but all four of their candidates are from Fulton County. Like you have to have someone from the south of the state, from the east of the state, from the Atlanta area of the state, from the north of the state. Like it's such a great system, and then they were sued and the system was thrown out, which I guess like, oh, Atlanta can't get their own seat. How dare they not be able to get their own seat? So Republicans drew it so that they have a 3-1 majority, no matter what, because that's just Georgia geography. You pack everyone into the Atlanta seat. Whoa! Democrats lose. Shocking. That's exactly what happened here. And like you could say, oh, this is a little bit of a gerrymander. Oh, okay. I mean, if they didn't, if they really wanted to gerrymander, they could knock out this seat. But for the most part, Georgia geography is just shitty for Democrats. Who would have figured? But you have two of those elections up in 2025 for the districts because now they've fucked up the entire system. You have a Republican incumbent running for reelection in the Fulton County and Friends district, which is what I call the Atlanta district. You have another one running in, like, I think it stretches around here. It's heavily Republican, so you shouldn't have any trouble winning. But you'll be able to see those and see. Well, if I'm right, you'll see black voters just not turn out whatsoever. So the Republican in Fulton County and Friends overperforms, and the Republican in the rest of the state, all these counties have like jack shit turnout. Like Republicans might win Warren County or maybe Taliaferro, though there's really no black. It's all black people there. There's not too many white voters in these counties, though. I guess if you're gonna see like Taliaferro flip before the end of the decade, it's gonna be in one of these elections. But you can see black voters not turn out for that. Well, now, what does that mean for 2026? Georgia Democrats rely exclusively on black voters. So if they don't turn out, what do you think happens? But I don't think you're here to talk about 2026. And I've talked about 2026 for, Jesus Christ, 20 minutes. I did not mean that. I didn't mean that. Mea culpa. I meant to eventually get to the presidential stuff. But this is another argument I've been making about Georgia. I made the separate argument you're going to do shit with turnout in midterms is much more competitive than you think, especially with Kemp not running. Um, I've got some hot takes about Georgia Senate and Georgia governor. I don't think is competitive whatsoever, unless Democrats can find a good nominee, which they don't have. So unless Trump's approval goes down to like negative 34%, which it's rebounding currently. I wonder what happened. You're not losing Georgia governor as a Republican. It's not really a competitive race. People think Alaska is competitive, but even those people who think Alaska is competitive don't think Georgia is competitive. But for president, it does seem like Georgia is gone for Republicans, and at least this narrative has been reinforced. Like, oh yes, the Atlanta suburbs will shift 10 points Democrat every cycle, so therefore, it's only a matter of time before Paulding County flips Democrat. No, what? Like, I get the idea that Georgia Democrats will begin to do better in the southern side of the state, which just a quick rundown of terms I use in Georgia. This area is Black Belt. This area is the south of the state. This area is the north rurals of the state. They have the north suburbs, which are like, it's complicated because the southern suburbs are like a crescent. I refer to Paulding as a southern suburb because it like shifts the exact same as these suburbs. But like Cobb, Cherokee, Forsyth, Gwinnett, Hall County, and northern Fulton or the northern suburbs of the state. Southern suburbs mostly if they shifted heavily Democrat in 2024 they count because they're like homogeneous in trend. Then you have like inner city Atlanta. So the reason people think that Georgia's gone is they look at this map and they say, look, especially it stands out with the rest of the map. Like there's no high Democrat shifts here. But where you do see shifts is these Atlanta suburbs. Wow, look, 9.2% shift, which I think is the biggest shift from 2020 to Kamala Harris in the entirety of the country, which is kind of insane. That is in Henry County. Makes sense because she spent a shit ton of money in the Atlanta metropolitan area. But I don't know. That's quirky. It's not like a county in her home state or anything. She shifted one of those left, and that county has 600 people living in it. Otherwise, every other county rejected her en masse. But Georgia, woohoo! Uh, it matters so much. How many people vote in that county? 120,000. I'm not saying that 120,000 voters don't matter. As like the average population of like Vermont or something. I know it's sports. Shut up. That's as many Republicans as there are in Vermont. But in the grand scheme of things, it's not that much in Georgia. 120,000, like that's like 2% of Georgia's population overall. And that 9% shift, it, you can net votes from that, obviously. But like at most, you'll net like 10,000 from that. Then Rockdale County, you'll net less, like maybe 5,000 at most. Newton, I mean, that's another 5,000 at best. Douglas, 5,000. Like, you're overall, if all of these Democrat areas shift the exact same, even though you can bump them by a 5 point margin, you net at most 50,000 from that. That doesn't even do halfway of Trump's statewide margin. Now, the idea is that the northern suburbs are going to shift the exact same way. Like, Cobb County will go back to shifting 5 point Democrats, 5 point to the Democrats every cycle again. Same thing with Gwinnett. Same thing with Cherokee. Same thing with Forsyth County. Same thing with Hall County. And you can believe that. Congrats. You can have like the Duns cap and be like, I'm an election analyst. Well, great. Not going to get paid $35 for this like Cook Political Report. Might as well use Cook Political Report while you're at it, because you're retarded enough to pay $35 for that. Like, these are not the same areas. Like, the southern suburbs are rapidly diversifying, like a Henry County or a Newton County or Douglas County are rapidly diversifying. Why? People from like the Midwest or New York or Virginia or a lot of these places are coalescing around Atlanta, but also, and this is where it really bites you in the ass, people from the rest of the state are moving to Atlanta, especially these southern suburbs. People from central Georgia, the Black Belt, and southern Georgia are moving to Atlanta. Boom. Truth bomb. You're done. But what does that mean? Well, I mean, if you have 20,000 black voters move to Henry County, well, you net 20,000 votes there. You have a big arrow on a map. Congrats. You can say, oh, the county's growing in population, so it's more influential. But if you're losing that statewide, you break even. And this is what I think people fail to understand. Like, you can have your shifts in the south of Atlanta. Wow. Congrats. But if those were enough to win the state, Kamala Harris would have won the state. If these trends that you saw in 2024 were enough to win the state, Kamala Harris would have won the state. And like, you could say, oh, but they've trended compared to the national environment. Kamala Harris, name how many dollars she spent in the Los Angeles media market. Name how many rallies she did in Manhattan. Like, oh, but the states that weren't swing states swung the most. Wow, that happens every election. When you have both sides spending significant amount of cash in the states, like, they'll swing. Obviously, that's why they're swing states. But they're not going to swing 10 points. That's every election. That's the same reason why Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania swung to the right of the national environment. That's the same reason why you had areas swing more than others. That's the exact same reason why the Philadelphia suburbs trended left in 2020. But then, whoa, shocking, in 2024 compared to the state at large, they trended right. Who could have seen this coming? Someone who understands that trend is not a useful metric to apply when it's based off one election. And you really can't apply anything before this election, because what you've seen is black voters aren't turning out as much. And honestly, this is my opinion. Obviously, it can be proven wrong, but I think 2020 Republicans just took the hit in Georgia. You lost in the suburbs, but that's probably not going to happen again, because you really don't have the same type of diversification happening in Cobb County, Gwinnett, Forsyth, Cherokee, even Fulton County as you did between 2016 and 2020 now, or between 2020 and 2024. And the problem for Georgia Democrats is you have to do better in the northern suburbs. Eventually, you either have to crack college educated whites, which probably doesn't happen for a while. That's why I've put the time constraint on it. Or you have to somehow pull black voters out of your ass. And you're not going to be able to do that, which does that mean that Georgia's going to be a Republican state forever? No, I think it can trend Republican, especially since it does seem like black voters, Democrat, liberal leaning companies are pulling out of the state. And the state is being governed to make it more Republican, obviously not in a similar way to Florida. But I do think that potentially you could see Republicans do a little bit better than this 2 point margin in the future, especially if they're going to win the presidency by more under someone like Vance. But what I also mean by this video, the main point I want to stress with Georgia heading into the future in presidential elections is it's not gone for the GOP. These Democrat trends, they look big on a map, but there's really no votes in any of these counties. And like, besides for, oh my God, look, another blue county when Fayette flips, like, there's really nothing of value for Democrats in these southern suburban shifts. Will they have to win the state through them? If they're ever going to win the state of Georgia for the next 20 years, yeah, they're going to be one of your only positive trends, but you still have to swing the northern suburbs in. So far, I really see no indication that that's going to happen. I think 2020 was a special election where you got high, not even high, massive, earth shattering black turnout. And I don't think you'll almost ever be able to get that again, which means you can't win through the Biden coalition. You have to diversify the state. And I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. Now, eventually, will that happen? Yes. Eventually, will Democrats crack Georgia college educated whites? Of course. Coalitions change for a reason, and coalitions are not changing beneficially for the Georgia and even the rest of the South state GOPs. Eventually, you're going to lose Georgia. And even eventually, you might lose North Carolina. I'm not so sure about that. But I think the Georgia GOP's days are numbered. And I think at some point, you begin to lose in the presidential elections. Not too many statewide elections up in presidential elections, but maybe a few decades after that, you begin to lose more. And like, this is a general trend. It's not like Reconstruction, where like you flip the state once and then it's suddenly solid for your column. It's not even like Florida 2018, where like Republicans won one gubernatorial election and then wow, every election after that is R+15. No, but eventually you'll start to see Georgia default, lean a little bit Democrat. People begin to treat it a bit more as if it's like a New Hampshire, or like a reverse Republican Florida or a reverse Republican Arizona. Like people begin to presume it's a little bit Democrat leaning. Democrats win like 60 or 70% of statewide elections eventually. And I do think Republicans keeping the runoff system in place, I think as much as people are like, oh my god, low turnout benefits Democrats, the first thing Democrats will do when they have a trifecta in Georgia, which probably isn't for a while, is kill that runoff system immediately. Even if they lose some statewide elections with it, even if like Purdue was given 6 more years as senator and now is up for re-election in 2026, even if you had Kelly Loeffler win because the Senate wasn't on the line in 2021, in that scenario where Purdue wins in the first round and Democrats don't turn out. Okay, but in general, it's probably going to help them when turnout is higher. And I think to crack Georgian midterms for Democrats, they're going to need high turnout. And you're not going to be able to build up that machine anytime soon. I think Georgia, there's two different factors determining it. Whether it stays Republican or whether it flips through. For presidential years, it's whether Democrats can break college educated whites, get more black voters in the state, get those black voters to turn out. Obviously, that's a common theme, and begin to erode at the GOP margins in some of these rural areas and begin to flip back some of this black belt. Like, you can't lose Jefferson County into the future. Like, I get, oh, there's not too many votes there, but that's a symptom of the black belt as a whole, which is unlike the southern suburbs, for the most part, somewhat homogeneous in the shifts. Obviously, if Jefferson County shifts right, it can't be like, oh my god, I know for a fact that Peach County and Bibb County and Clay County and Burke County and Wilkes County are all shifting the exact same margin Republican. But for the most part, Democrats want to do better in the black belt, and you're not predestined to do terribly there, potentially. But really, at some point, Democrats are going to have to choose either do better in the black vote, do better in the black belt, um, do better with college educated whites throughout the entire state, narrow the margins in some of these rural areas, or go in all in on Atlanta or bust. And if you can create a sustainable coalition for Democrats where college educated whites begin to not be toss up, I'm not saying that college educated whites go from R+30 to D+10 like immediately. No, but if they're like R+15, Republicans don't have a path to win Georgia. So either you do that or you go full black turnout. And the problem is Part B, midterms and off years. You will not win Georgia in off year elections if you go, well, just jack up black turnout. You win in presidential years. Congrats. Uh, I made an entire video about why I think Republicans probably are favored for the presidency heading into the future. Congrats. And good luck winning it in presidential years if you give Republicans unified control of government. Since realistically, the GOP is winning this gubernatorial election, they're not losing either house of the state legislature. But I will say, if you focus less on black turnout, you focus more on narrowing the margin with those college educated whites, you'll get black turnout in these midterms. Will it be as much as college educated whites? No. But eventually, what will happen is black voters will vote like D+70, college educated whites will vote like R+20. They'll be able to overwhelm them. So that's why I don't think Georgia's an instant flip for Democrats. Though I could see it potentially being an instant flip, depending on how these trends go into the future. If it's 2028 and you still see similar trends, even with if like Vance wins probably by like 5 or something, which I don't think is on the table, but potentially could be on the table, and then you see like Henry County shift another 10 points Democrat, then you got to worry about Georgia. But for now, I recommend Republicans chill out. Every state shift to Republican. Um, like Georgia shift to Republican. We flipped the state, and the idea that like, oh, we just flipped the state, it's obviously going to become a solid Democrat state by the end of the decade. It's the exact same people who think that Texas will be a Democrat state by 2028. Like, these people have no comprehension of politics whatsoever. Why are we taking them seriously? But anyways, if you enjoyed this video, I was a bit messy here. um it's late, and I think especially for people who watch some of my streams, like the election night stream and the Canadian election stream, which is now up, I get a bit more sloppy when I'm late and beginning to be sleep deprived. My words slur a little bit more. Um, think of it as like as if I had like 2 beers or something. Um, I become stupider. But yeah, so if this video wasn't that great, it's because of that. Uh, I definitely overcompensated for the fact that Georgia's going to have some pretty important elections in 2025 and 2026. And I also do like to tell the history of these things, like, especially if people don't know anything about, like, Georgia in 2021. People turn on a political video and want to be entertained. And if you're turning on a 40-minute political video, I hope at least you have the time to sit through most of it. But, anyways, thank you for watching. This is Michigan and Georgia are kind of my two hot takes, like really hot takes out of the presidential level. A lot of people think that Michigan will default to being Democrat again, which if you want to see a video, uh I might link it. Who knows? But I might link it in the description. Otherwise it's on my channel page. I just scroll down a little bit in recent uploads. But a lot of people think that Michigan will default to being a Democrat state again. A lot of people think Georgia is going to be a Democrat state again. I think winning it in 2020, winning it in 2022 really gave them overconfidence, and they can't deal with the fact that Trump won it. Like, I don't know. Being humiliated just doesn't break some people. But, anyways, thank you for watching. Um, yeah, this is the type of shit that we do when there's no elections happening, but there are elections happening in Georgia. I'm not, I'm not completely sure when the primaries for that are. If they're on May 20th, I won't be streaming them. But if they are a different day, we'll be streaming them. So stay tuned, subscribe for that. Thank you for watching, guys.